The command struck him harder than the soldier's picks ever had. It was not merely sound. It was authority shaped into pressure, a weight laid across every new-grown corridor and crude chamber he had assembled from stolen mana and desperate improvisation. For one blinding instant, Thorne felt how fragile his claim truly was. He had thought himself a maker because he had carved a crawlspace, raised a trap, animated a goblin corpse badly enough to shamble at intruders. Against whatever had built the sealed stair below, he was a child stacking pebbles in the shadow of a fortress. Outside, another stone gave way. A gauntleted arm thrust through the breach and withdrew with a hiss when the frost on the seam bit exposed skin. The men were close enough now that he could taste their heat through the wall, close enough to matter, close enough to feed him. Mana reserves critical, hostile ingress imminent, emergency protocol awaiting compliance. Open what? Thorne demanded and hated how strained he sounded. He had no lungs, no tongue, but fear had found a way to live in crystal. If you mean my core, no. The figure in the stair did not advance. It only stood there, immense with patience, red sockets fixed on him like banked coals. Access to substructure, it said. Transfer of custodial burden. Defensive continuity must be maintained. Mara made a broken noise. It talks. One of the soldiers beyond the wall shouted, "There's another chamber, pry it down." Thorne split his attention so fast his awareness frayed. The breach, the thing below. Mara crouched beside his crystal with blood dried black on her temple and terror making her clever eyes bright. The goblin twisted under fallen bones, alive but dimming, every pulse of pain in it scraping through his own nerves. He could not stop the men and confront the warden and reassure the prisoner and save the creature all at once. Human thought wanted sequence. Dungeon thought demanded triage. He chose survival. Stone flexed at his will. Not enough for elegance, not enough for anything he might have called architecture in life, but enough. He let the cracked ceiling above the funnel corridor fail where the soldiers had weakened it. Slabs came down in a roar. One man cried out and cut off abruptly, another bellowed orders through a cough of dust. Spears clattered. Torchlight vanished behind a curtain of rubble and powdered limestone. Essence absorbed. 7. Mana reserves, stabilized. Trap efficacy bonus awarded. Improvised kill structure increased. Warmth flooded through him so suddenly it was obscene. The hollow ache inside his crystal softened. Cracks he had not known he carried in his awareness sealed by degrees. He understood, with the same sharpness as hunger, exactly why dungeons became monsters. Relief had a flavor, and it was made from people. Mara stared at the ruined passage, then at the red pulse inside his crystal. "You did that on purpose." "Yes," he said. She flinched, not because of the answer but because he had not lied. The warden tilted its head a fraction. Adaptive response confirmed. Local core demonstrates functional cruelty. "That isn't a qualification I wanted," Thorne snapped. "Qualification is irrelevant. Capacity is sufficient." A shudder moved up through the stair beneath it. Sigils along the walls bloomed, violet sinking toward crimson. Information pressed into him in fragments too large to hold at once. Gate arrays, reserve chambers, dormant veins of mana, containment rings, old oaths embedded in stone. The buried structure was not a basement. It was an organ, a second body beneath his own crude shell, ancient and armored and waiting for a mind to seat itself in its nerves. Required action, designate warden link. No active custodian, no lineage claimant. Nearest functioning core prioritized. The goblin gave a weak, scraping whimper from under the bones. Thorne reached for it instinctively and felt, for the first time, not merely a thread of control, but a point in the system where command could deepen into something else. Bond, elevation, investiture. The concept unfolded with terrifying clarity. His attention snapped back to the stone giant in the seam. "If I accept," he said, "what do I become?" The furnace eyes burned brighter. Beyond the collapse, the trapped soldiers had begun hammering again, frantic now. Mara drew her knees to her chest and watched him as if waiting to learn which shape of doom would speak next. The warden's voice rolled through every wall he possessed. "Accountable," it said, and the buried doors below began to open. The buried doors opened with a groan so deep it rattled grit from the ceiling, and every instinct Thorne still possessed screamed that whatever waited beneath them was older, larger, and less negotiable than the men breaking into his outer corridor. "Open what?" he demanded. The warden did not look at him when it answered. It stepped fully into his chamber, stone feet grinding the fractured seam flatter, and raised one arm toward the stair below. "Jurisdiction," it said. "Recognition. Chain of custody." Beyond the rubble, a soldier found enough leverage to wrench loose a slab. Cold torchlight knifed through the gap. Thorne felt 3 living bodies press against the breach, desperate and hurt, and for one trembling instant their pulse beats were louder to him than the warden's words. Hunger narrowed the world to meat, warmth, essence. Mara saw his crystal flare and flattened herself against the wall. "Don't," she whispered, though whether she meant the men, the thing from below, or him, he could not tell. Thorne forced his attention away from the breach. "If I open this jurisdiction," he said, "do I control it?" "Control is conditional," said the warden. "Failure revokes possession." That was not reassurance. It was, however, information, and information had kept him alive through worse places than this. Another slab tore free. A mailed hand shoved through the opening, groping for purchase. The injured goblin made a thin, choking sound from under the bonefall. Thorne had no mana for grand designs, no time for debate, and no illusion that the soldiers would politely wait while he negotiated with ancient protocol. He reached toward the system point he had just sensed between himself and the warden. Not quite a lever, not quite a door, but a knot of permissions wound into the dungeon's marrow. The moment he touched it, pain lanced through his lattice. New channels unfolded below him in a branching map of sealed passages, dead shrines, forgotten cisterns, and one vast central chamber wrapped around a second, deeper heart of stone. The knowledge did not come freely. It tore mana out of him in shining strands and fed it into the waiting mechanism. Mana reserves, 3. Warning, claim initiation incomplete. The soldier through the breach found purchase and hauled half his body inside. Blood slicked his gauntlet. He saw Mara first and bared his teeth. "Girl, move." Thorne triggered the only trap he could still afford. The cracked floor under the man's weight sheared sideways. His chest slammed the edge of the gap hard enough to break something. Then he vanished backward into his companions with a tangle of curses and ringing steel. The effort cost the last neat margin he had. Mana reserves, 1. The warden turned its mask toward him. Insufficient. "I noticed." Experiment, Thorne thought, because panic without method was just dying noisily. He tested the bond point again, not with raw mana this time, but with connection. He touched the goblin first. Pain answered. The shoulder wound, the animal terror, the stubborn little spark of obedience that had not fled even now. Then he touched Mara. Not command, there was no bond there, but proximity, resonance, the way her life brushed his field simply by standing within his chamber. Last, against every human reflex remaining in him, he brushed the minds beyond the breach. The result hit him like a hook dragged across exposed crystal. Not essence gained. Essence promised. Threat creates claim pressure. Bound defenders reduce cost. Unbound intruders increase yield only on defeat within territory. The rule arrived not as a lecture but as a working shape. Territory meant more than rooms. Possession had weight. A defender inside it was worth more than a victim passing through it. That was why the warden had come to him first. That was why the goblin still mattered. Earned then, not granted. Thorne acted before the insight could evaporate. He reached for the goblin and pushed. Not healing, he lacked the mana, but designation. A sliver of himself drove into the creature like a hot nail. Minor investiture available. Confirm, First Warden candidate. The goblin looked up, one eye wide with terror and confusion. Its bloody hand clutched the femur shard as if it knew a verdict hovered over it. Mara stared at him. "What are you doing?" "What he had to," he confirmed. Power left him so completely that for a heartbeat he felt his thoughts go dim, like embers under ash. The goblin arched and shrieked. Bone dust whirled around it. Hairline sigils flashed over its skin, sank into flesh and vanished. When it staggered upright again, its wound still bled but less. Its back was straighter. Its remaining eye burned with a new, ugly steadiness. Bond established. Warden rank lesser. Claim cost reduced. The stone giant inclined its head by a degree. Approval, perhaps, or merely acknowledgement that he had obeyed the first necessary rule. At the breach, the soldiers surged again, and below, the newly opened dark exhaled something cold and ancient into all his halls as Thorne turned to face both invasions at once. The first soldier through the choke point came low behind his shield, disciplined enough to step where the blood already was, and not where the floor looked clean. Thorne respected him for that and dropped the ceiling anyway. Not the whole span. He no longer had mana for grand gestures. He sheared loose one cracked rib of stone he had prepared in better hours, and the slab slammed down on the rear ranks with a noise like a door on judgment. One man vanished beneath it. Another lost his torch and screamed as flame rolled through spilled oil and old grease in a gutter Thorne had carved for drainage and never used for water. The shieldman made it through. He hit Mara first, because she was alive and frightened and visibly weak. Thorne sent a spike of pain through the goblin bond so sharp it nearly blinded them both. The little creature shrieked, understood, and launched itself from the bone fall not at the soldier's throat but at the straps behind his knee. Clever, better than brave, its teeth locked, its good hand sawed with the stolen femur shard. The man staggered half a pace, enough for Mara to crawl sideways instead of dying where she knelt. "Back!" she shouted, not to the soldier but to Thorne, as if she had forgotten what he was and remembered too fast. "If you can hear thought, then hear this. There are 6 more behind him. Not here. Feel. Counted by weight, heat, the tremor of steel against stone. 6, yes, and one of them had the calm pulse of someone used to killing in close dark." The stone warden moved for the first time with purpose. It did not rush. It simply stepped into the seam and became a wall where a wall had not been. The shieldman hacked at it on instinct. His sword struck mineral-crusted arm and snapped a handspin from the hilt. "Unauthorized extraction," the giant said, and drove one fist into the man's chest. Armor folded. Breath and blood burst together. The body struck the corridor floor and did not try to rise. For one stunned heartbeat, no one moved. Then the soldiers outside saw enough through firelight and smoke to understand that the dungeon had answered them. "Mage," someone shouted. "There's a bound construct in here." Not construct, Thorne thought, but the distinction did him no good. Public knowledge was a kind of wound, and he felt this one opening. Mana trickled in from death, thin and unsatisfying. He grabbed it before the system could waste a grain. The cost of the goblin bond still burned through his lattice. His crystal ached with hairline stress. One more heavy expenditure and he might crack. The veteran came next, not through the center but up along the jammed wall where rubble made new footing. Hook blade in one hand, hatchet in the other, face wrapped in cloth against dust. He did not attack the giant. He threw the hatchet at Mara. Thorne moved faster than thought because he had once had a human body and remembered exactly how helpless flesh was. He jerked every loose bone in the niche at once. Vertebrae, skull fragments, femurs, all of it burst outward in a white swarm. The hatchet struck a pelvis instead of her skull, glanced wide, and buried itself in the goblin's shoulder. The bond buckled with shared agony. His vision flashed white. The goblin did not fall. It made a sound Thorne had never heard from it before. Not fear, not pain, but ownership. It ripped the blade free with a wet jerk, clutched it in trembling fingers, and hurled itself at the veteran's face. He caught it by the throat mid-leap and smashed it into the wall hard enough to crack stone. Something cold in Thorne settled into a decision. He opened the lower stair. Not fully, just enough. The bruised sigils below flared. Ancient air knifed upward. The veteran's head snapped toward the dark for a fatal fraction of a second, and in that instant the stone warden seized him by the spine and hip and bent until joints tore like soaked leather. The corridor filled with the smell of opened blood and void-cold dust. Mara stared at the moving bones, at the giant, at the goblin coughing on the floor, and finally at the crystal set above them all. She understood too much now. Thorne felt the knowledge settle in her like a hidden blade, just as the thing below the stair answered his partial opening, with a deeper, hungrier pulse from the dark beyond. The pulse from below hit him again, slower this time, like the measured beat of a colossal heart deciding whether he was worth sparing. The stone warden did not turn from the butchered soldier at its feet. "Access incomplete," it said. "Transfer unstable, state command." "I don't know the command," Thorne snapped and hated the edge of desperation in his own voice. "I woke here half-formed." "Confirmed," the warden replied. "Lineage absent, instruction absent. Authority provisional." Outside, the remaining soldiers broke. One dragged the wounded man by the shoulders while another backed away with shield raised toward the corridor, as if polished steel could stop the thing in the stair. The third looked once at the red-lit sockets of the warden and fled without even pretending discipline mattered. Thorne marked all three, tasted the thin drifting stream of fear and blood they left behind, and nearly reached for it before forcing himself still. Mara pushed herself upright against the rubble. Her face had gone white beneath the dirt. "Provisional means what?" the warden answered her instead of him. "Nearest active core inherits duty of sealed depth until lawful successor is installed or core fails." Duty. Not power, not treasure. Duty. The word settled into him heavier than stone. He had wanted rooms, traps, choices that belonged to him. The thing below the stair had just informed him that his dungeon was not a beginning but an annex chained to something older and worse. "What sealed depth?" he asked. The warden's furnace eyes brightened a fraction. "Containment vault, threat class omitted, custodian dead, fail state unacceptable." "That means if I refuse, then protocol opens by force. Core is integrated, consumed, or shattered according to resistance." A bitter laugh almost escaped him. There it was, the shape of his freedom. Become a jailer or become raw material. At the edge of his awareness, the goblin whimpered. It had dragged itself behind the bone niche with one good arm, leaving a dark streak. Its shoulder hung wrong, where the soldier's backswing had nearly cleaved through muscle. The creature kept one wide yellow eye fixed on Thorne's crystal, not with devotion now, but with the naked terror of something waiting to learn whether it still belonged. A notification surfaced through the pounding in his mind. Dependent asset at critical integrity. Unattended loss will reduce domain cohesion. Available action, bind/cull/ignore. He stared at the words. Mara saw nothing, but she saw his silence. "What is it now?" "My goblin is dying." She gave a short, incredulous breath. "Your goblin, mine." The system had made the word plain before he would have admitted it himself. The options hung there. Cull would reclaim mana. Ignore would cost him the creature and whatever fragile thread he had spun through it. Bind required essence, more than he could comfortably spare, and the instinctive understanding that came with the option was even worse. Binding would not merely heal. It would anchor the goblin to his domain, deepen obedience, reshape both of them. A true servant. A first subject. Irreversible. The goblin made a thin clicking sound in its throat and tried, absurdly, to crawl toward the corridor as if it could still defend him. That decided it. "Bind," Thorne said. Mana tore out of him in a hot, wrenching stream. The goblin convulsed. Bone dust leapt from the floor and wound around its ruined shoulder in tight spirals while old blood hissed black. It screamed once, then choked into silence as the arm jerked back into place with a wet grinding pop. Across its collarbone, lines the color of dim ember spread under the skin in the same angular pattern hidden through Thorne's own chamber. Bonded subordinate established. Goblin scavenger advanced to goblin keeper. Domain cohesion increased. Mana reserves, hazardous. The creature collapsed panting, then lifted its head and looked at his crystal with something new in its eyes. Not simple fear, recognition, A tether. Mara saw that too, and horror sharpened her voice. You changed it. Yes, you can do that to people. The question struck harder than the mana loss. He did not answer quickly enough, and that was answer enough. Her mouth tightened. She looked from him to the stair and made a decision of her own, small but final. Whatever plea she might once have made for release, alliance, mercy, it had died. Now she was measuring survival. The warden stepped fully into the chamber. Stone scraped stone. Provisional core, final notice, accept custody and seal or depth breach proceeds. Thorne reached through his rooms, through cracked walls and blood-slick stone, through the fading echoes of fleeing men. He felt how little he truly possessed. One wounded prisoner, one half-starved goblin newly bound, one ancient sentinel waiting to judge him. And under all of it, a door no sane thing had built without a reason. If he accepted, he became keeper of a prison he did not understand. If he refused, whatever lay below would rise through him first. He gathered what remained of his strength around the split seam and said, "Tell me what I must hold shut," just as the deeper dark on the far side of the stair answered with a sound like chains drawing breath. The ancient thing did not answer him in words at first. It moved. Its hand, stone over rusted bronze, drove into the seam between his chamber and the stair. Sigils flared across its arm and into the split bedrock, and Thorne felt the entire hill jolt as if a nail had been hammered through its spine. The pressure rising from below checked for a single breath, not stopped but measured, and in that stolen instant the sentinel spoke again. Containment degraded. 3 seals failed. Outer custodian terminated. Nearest core designated replacement warden. A soldier lunged through the rubble gap before Thorne could reply. He came half-crouched behind his shield, more desperate than brave, torch thrust forward to blind whatever waited inside. The light hit Mara's face, the sprawled goblin, the blood, the impossible figure in the seam, and his courage broke too late to save him. Thorne dropped the ceiling shelf he had been holding by instinct alone. Stone hit bronze-rimmed shield, shoulder, skull. The man vanished under rock with a sound too soft to be called a scream. Essence rushed out of him in a hot thread that the dungeon seized greedily, and the system answered at once. Emergency custodial authority available. Accept transfer. Y/and no cost was listed. That frightened him more than any price. Another impact shook the corridor. The surviving soldiers were retreating now, dragging wounded, but not fast enough to count as gone. Mara was still backing away from his crystal, eyes wide and wet with calculation. The goblin had dragged itself in front of her without seeming to know why, bared teeth trembling, one ruined shoulder hanging low. It was protecting her. That absurdly made the decision for him. Yes, Thorne said. The transfer did not feel like power entering him. It felt like walls realizing he belonged inside them. New lines of sense bit deep into his awareness. Hidden channels in the stone, old anchor points, the drag of buried chains descending in impossible spirals beneath his domain. The chamber widened in his mind. Then the corridor, then a ring of forgotten spaces lower down, all locked around something he could not yet perceive directly, because every path to it had been choked, collapsed, or sealed on purpose. Warden designation accepted, authority limited, seal access partial. New function unlocked, bind lesser custodian. New function unlocked, redirect mana through anchor. Warning, prisoner pressure increasing. The sentinel swayed as if some load had shifted off it at last. Furnace-red eyes dimmed a shade and fixed on Thorne's crystal. Command. Good. Something in this nightmare would obey. Shut the breach, Thorne said, and then, because he had learned what vague orders cost, not the outer entrance, the deep one, reinforce this chamber, spare the living woman. The construct turned. Sigils raced over the stair into the split seam across the floor under Mara's hands. Stone groaned. The open crack below narrowed by inches, then by feet, grinding upward through a spray of frost and sparks. The pressure from beneath slammed against it hard enough to split fresh veins through the walls, but the seal held. For now, mana tore out of Thorne in a flood to feed the process. His reserves plunged toward empty. Without thinking, he reached for the new function and fastened it onto the nearest willing thing. The goblin jerked as a mark of bruised violet light branded itself over its heart and then faded into skin. Lesser custodian bound. A pulse answered him from the creature, fear, pain, stubborn life, and one simple instinct suddenly threaded with purpose: guard. Not loyalty exactly, not yet, but a place to stand and a thing to defend. The goblin lifted its head. Its good eye found Mara, then the stare, then his crystal, and Thorne felt the shape of its choice settle. Mara stared at the seal knitting shut. "What did you do?" "Survived," Thorne said, though the word rang thin in his own mind. Because beneath the grinding stone, beyond the chains and anchors newly visible to him, something vast had noticed the transfer. He felt it turn in darkness older than the hill, patient no longer, and a voice too deep for air touched every wall of his dungeon. "New warden," it said, and the sealed stare began to bulge inward.